Hello everybody, my name is Jackie and welcome to Prairie Sports Talk, the podcast where we talk about sports that directly impact the Canadian Prairie. Today is July 25th, 2024, and we have some very interesting stories to talk about this week. So, we're going to open up talking a little bit about hockey, and then we are going to talk a lot about Canadian football because unfortunately, due to personal reasons, I ended up having to miss last week's episode. But don't worry, we're going to make up for it this week. Let's get into it. Earlier this month, the Ted Knight Saskatchewan Hockey Hall of Fame inducted a bunch of new members at its annual induction ceremony. Most notably, Travis Moen and Patrick Marleau from Southwest Saskatchewan both got inducted, as well as Tim Tisdale, best known for scoring the 1989 Memorial Cup winning goal for the Swift Current Broncos. To this date, it is still the only Memorial Cup the Broncos have won. And then Corey Sachak, a defenseman, the goalie Jack Norris, and the referee Brad Meyer were all also inducted. As for hockey teams inducted, it was the 2016, 2018, and 2019 Kyle Elks, as well as the U17 Team Saskatchewan from 1995. Massive congratulations to all the inductees this year. I hope next year I can actually attend the induction ceremony, but regardless, I wanted to touch on it a little bit today. And now we move on to some great news for a young, promising Swift Current Broncos defender. Peyton Kettles has been named to the U18 Gretzky Cup selection camp for Team Canada. Massive congratulations to him. He was one of 5 WHL defenders and 13 WHL players named to the selection camp. In his rookie season, he recorded 13 points in the regular season and 2 in the playoffs. In the regular season, those points were split up between 2 goals and 11 assists, as well as both of his points in the playoffs were assists. This wouldn't be his first time repping the Maple Leaf, as he has played for Team Canada Red at the World Under-17 Hockey Challenge in PEI last season. Massive congratulations to Peyton Kettles, and nothing but the best luck in the camp for him as well. After missing last week's episode, we have a lot to talk about with the CFL, so let's begin with my Week 6 recap. Much to my surprise, the week began with the Toronto Argonauts defeating the Montreal Alouettes, handing them their first loss on the season. It was very much a return to form for Cameron Dukes after a really rough week against Saskatchewan the previous week. It wasn't necessarily a super notable game, but he played decent. He went 16 for 20 for 131 yards, as well as getting a touchdown and 46 yards on 9 rushes. But the ground game was the story of the week for Toronto because they put up a combined total of 183 rushing yards. 94 of those came from Kadeem Carey on 16 carries. But there was a major story to come out of this game, one that will impact the Montreal Alouettes into Week 8, because Cody Fajardo went down in the first and he did not return. This is not a good thing for Montreal, to say the very least. Fajardo is having a career season. At time of injury, over the season he had thrown 144 for 182 for 77%. He gained 1,636 yards and threw for 10 touchdowns with only 4 interceptions. Caleb Evans did come into the game, but he didn't necessarily play the best, and that's not a great sign for Montreal. I think Evans can be good enough that Montreal also has a solid season. If God forbid Cody is out long term, but I don't think he's good enough for Montreal to live up to the potential they have this season. I hope Cody does better, because even though things in Saskatchewan ended very rough for him, I still very much have a soft spot for him in my heart. He is still one of my favorite players in the league, and he genuinely seems like one of the nicest guys in the league as well. So then we move on to another surprising game for me, because despite predicting Calgary would just stomp Winnipeg, honestly, Winnipeg ended up beating them for their second win of the season. So I thought it was very notable that Zach Collaros was actually back for this game after being injured. I thought he'd be out 2-3 weeks at least. But it was a very good sign for the Bombers that he came back this week. And he played solid, to say the least. He went 27 for 36 for 344 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, he did give up 2 interceptions. But the story of the week was Ontario Wilson having an insane game. 201 receiving yards on 13 receptions and a touchdown. Oliveira also had a tremendous game, gained 109 yards on 15 carries and a touchdown. The Bombers had an insane 444 net yards after the game. Calgary's offense, they were right in it too. They had a very good game as well, which is why this game went right down to the wire. Jake Mail went 20 for 31 for 316 yards. He also had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions like Zach Collaros did. There was no single receiver that stood out for Calgary in this game, but there were 3 receivers over 60 yards on the game. Clark Barnes had 80 yards in 5 receptions. Jalen Philpott made his presence felt with an insane 66 yards on just 2 receptions. Reggie Begelton also had, a game we've seen from him numerous times. It's Reggie Begelton. He's a tremendous player. And he had 62 yards on 3 receptions. Dietrich Mills did play in this game despite the fact that the week prior Calgary signed Jamal Moore. And he made a case to be Calgary's number 1 running back. He had 131 yards on 15 carries. Calgary actually ended up having more net yards than Winnipeg with an insane 458. At this point in the season, it looked like that Winnipeg might be starting to turn a corner, but honestly, I feel like this win and the previous week's win were both blown out of proportion. I will get into that more when I talk about next week, but I did want to just point that out. And then we move on to the third game of the week. Unsurprisingly, BC continued their tremendous season with a big win against the Saskatchewan Roughriders, handing the Riders their first loss on the season. VA continued to just play out of his mind this season. He went 26 for 42 with an absurd 451 yards. He had a passing touchdown, but the turnover hawk defense for Saskatchewan did manage to snag a pair of interceptions from the turnover hawk defense did manage to snag a pair of interceptions from the MLP frontrunner. And meanwhile, Justin McInnis, he showed up against his former team. McInnis had 243 yards and a touchdown on 14 receptions against the Riders. I saw a lot of people online comparing his stats with Saskatchewan versus his stats with BC to G. Simon's stats with Winnipeg versus his stats with the Lions. And I just want to say, if Justin Simon, if G. McInnis, I'm so sorry. If Justin McInnis continues to play this way, those comparisons are very, very well warranted. And regardless, the fact that he is being compared to Simon, that is tremendous when you can be compared to one of the greatest players in recent CFL history. G. Simon is an all-time great player. As for the Rough Riders, they looked solid too. They weren't perfect by any means, but I mean, it's a loss. You're not going to look perfect. The defense held Stanback to just 14 yards on 12 carries. Meanwhile, on the offense, Patterson, he started to show some signs that should be taken as positives for the Rough Riders. He didn't look perfect, but he went 17 for 23 for 278 yards. By all means, that is a very good game. and he seems to have developed one of two of his favorite receivers in this game. In this game, he really enjoyed passing the ball to Samuel Emilus. It's always a good choice to pass the ball to a star receiver when you're a young quarterback. AJ Ouellette continues his upward climb this season, as well as he had 12 carries for 72 yards and a pair of touchdowns this week. But this week, the major story for the Rough Riders was it was a week of missed opportunities. Most notably, when the Riders were on the goal line, for some reason they had Patterson sneak it up the middle on third down instead of turning it around and handing it off to Ouellette, who already had 2 touchdowns. I did not understand this decision in the slightest. Patterson is right now the starting quarterback for the time being with Harris out. So if he gets hurt, that's a major issue for the Rough Riders. B, you go out, you get a superstar running back in AJ Ouellette, and then you don't use him in a clutch situation like this. I don't know what was going on with the offense there. And then there was another really annoying moment in the game where Patterson went deep and had Jarrett Stearns wide open as he sprinted into the end zone. He looks over his left shoulder, doesn't see the ball. He panics. He looks over his right shoulder, doesn't see the ball. As the ball soars over his left shoulder, lands in front of him in the end zone. It would have been a touchdown that could have potentially changed the game. It's very frustrating to see things like this. It was an easy TD, but unfortunately, the young receiver lost track of the football. Things are going to happen with a young receiver like Stearns. I still think he has a very bright future in this league, but it does not change the fact that it was painful to watch. And another very notable thing that happened in this game, Jamarcus Hardrick went down. And news has come out that Hardrick will be down for the majority of the remainder of the season. This is very frustrating to say the least. The Rough Riders finally get together a good old line, and they have the heart and soul of it in Jamarcus Hardrick just for him to go down in the first quarter of the season. It's frustrating. I wish Hardrick the best, and I hope he has a speedy recovery. As for the Riders, next man up. You gotta be ready in football. And then we move on to the first half of a home-and-home series for Ottawa and Edmonton. Another week in the CFL, another walk-off field goal. And this one didn't just change the game and win it for Ottawa, this potentially has changed the season for the CFL. So it was a surprisingly entertaining game. Last episode, I said that this game would likely not be overly entertaining, as these are two of the weaker teams in the CFL. I could not have been more wrong. It was an insane game, especially for Drew Brown, who put up an absolutely absurd 480 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Despite throwing a pick, he still had an insane game. But let's talk about that ending a little bit. The ending that resulted in a walk-off field goal. After McLeod Bethel-Thompson masterfully drives the length of the field, throwing 6 for 8 for 48 yards, and then the Red Blacks take a costly PI penalty after 2 failed attempts to punch in from the goal line from Prukop. The Elks send on their kicking team. They make no mistake. Kick goes right through. However, Boris Beatty then goes to line up for the kickoff, and he kicks it out of bounds. Ottawa proceeded to start the next drive on their own 50 as a result. A very costly mistake. Brown very quickly drilled a perfect pass to Pimperton. Lewis Ward is then set up in the perfect spot to win the game, The Red Blacks let the clock tick down to 0 seconds as is allowed in the CFL, and he makes no mistake, Ward drills a game-winning walk-off field goal. And this game appears to have been the final straw for the Elks, because they fired Chris Jones this week. The week after this loss, they fired him. G. Simon has taken over as general manager and Jarius Jackson has taken over as head coach. In his second term with the team, Chris Jones went an abysmal 8-33, including a historically bad 22-game home losing streak. It's no secret that Jones was not the solution in Edmonton, but it got to the point where he became a massive part of the problem. It is going to take time for the Elks to climb up out of this hole, but at very least they have a ladder now. After a chaotic Week 6, moving into Week 7, we had a very interesting matchup to open things up in the CFL. We had Ottawa and Edmonton wrapping up their home-and-home series, and I thought Edmonton might be able to pull out a win after firing Chris Jones. However, Ottawa proved me wrong and defeated the Elks. Edmonton looked like the same old team we have seen over the last couple seasons. And unfortunately, that's just simply because the roster Chris Jones put together is just not well-rounded. I have harped on this all season long, and I will continue to harp on it until the Elks have fixed it. They do not have a good offensive line. They went out, they spent all this money on McLeod Bethel-Thompson, a player who they did not need, mind you, and barely spent anything on their offensive line. And I think in the next couple weeks, we're going to see proof that the Elks don't need Bethel-Thompson, because at the end of this game, Trey Ford came in. The future of Canadian football came into the game. Now granted, he did not have much time on the field. But this brings up an issue for the Elks, because now one of the highest paid players in the league, he no longer has the starting quarterback job guaranteed in Edmonton. So Edmonton is sitting here, they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to a player who is not even guaranteed to start every game anymore, and they're barely paying the offensive line any money because they don't have a good offensive line. The only thing Edmonton can do from here, if they want to move on to Ford, as I think they should, is they need to try and move Bethel-Thompson. Now, whether that's a trade or cutting him over the offseason, I don't know. I think a trade would benefit Edmonton the most because they might be able to get something back for him. But that brings up the question, what team would want to take on that contract? Because most teams have a quarterback they are pretty set on right now. You look at the West, VA is the man in BC. Calgary, they are in love with how Jake Mayo has been playing so far this season. Saskatchewan has got Trevor Harris, who's only a few years older than McLeod Bethel-Thompson. Winnipeg has Zach Collaros and Chris Strevler. So you look at the East now. Ottawa, they seem to be pretty high on Drew Brown, and even if Brown for whatever reason ends up falling off, they got Crum, who could come in and potentially make some noise. So what about Hamilton? I think Hamilton would benefit from picking up MBT, but I don't think it's going to happen because they still seem to be very high on Bo Levi Mitchell. So what about Toronto? Well, Toronto, they still got he who shall not be named as their starter, even though he is currently suspended. And then they got Cameron Dukes as the backup. Solid player. Really solid player. They also have Nick Arbuckle under him. That is a really solid 1-2-3. Okay, so you continue moving east. What about Montreal? Well, they have Cody Fajardo. Yes, he is injured at the moment, but they should maybe give Caleb Evans a little time before they press the panic button, so to say. And Fajardo's injury might not be overly serious, so it might only be a couple weeks. That exhausts the league. That leaves Edmonton no one to trade Bethel Thompson to. So that means their only other option is likely releasing him after the season. But that is still going to result in their salary cap being a pain to manage this season, because they're paying Bethel Thompson all this money even though they didn't need him because they had Trey Ford. It is a complete mess right now in Edmonton. But anyway, back to the game that we started this whole segment talking about. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot more to say about this game, honestly. Drew Brown struggled a little bit, had a couple picks, but I mean, Ottawa got the win, so there's definitely some room to work for Brown, but I mean, I don't think it's cause for any concern. Young quarterbacks are going to have slip-ups every now and then in the CFL. So then we move on to the Saskatchewan Roughriders Winnipeg Blue Bombers game. And oh boy, was this game explosive. So I picked the Riders to win. Everyone seemed to doubt them. But I felt like Winnipeg's last two wins might have been blown a little bit out of proportion. Because one game was against the Red Blacks, a team that they should beat. And the other game was a late game win against Calgary. I think they were somewhat blown out of proportion. I feel like those two games don't matter as much as people are saying they do. And in this game, Patterson continues to put up tremendous numbers for the Rough Riders. Now, he's not necessarily on Harris level production right now, but he's definitely producing enough that the Riders can feel comfortable playing with him for the time being. He went 17 for 25 for 261, and this week, to me, looked like even further proof that AJ Ouellette has started to find a groove in Saskatchewan. He had 17 carries for 88 yards, but the big story in this game, Ajo. Everyone in the CFL has been talking about this kid, and for good reason. He has been a massive steal for the Riders, a 7th round pick, and he is having a tremendous season. He had 110 yards. He had 110 yards receiving in this game alone, and 70 of those yards were yards after catch. He had more yak yards than almost anyone else had receiving yards. The only exception was Brady Oliveira had more receiving yards than Ajo had in yak yards, but like I mentioned, Ajo still had the most receiving yards in the game. And it's always a fun matchup when these two teams play each other. I think this is the best rivalry in the CFL. And, oh boy, did we see why they are rivals. Last play of the game, Shea Patterson drops back. He's looking downfield, running around in the backfield, in my opinion, very obviously just killing time because he couldn't kneel on third down without giving the ball back to the Bombers with time on the clock. So he's running around waiting for the clock to hit 0. He throws it up. Game's over, right? Adam Big Hill disagrees. Big Hill hits Patterson. I want to be clear, it is not the hit I have the issue with. It's what happened afterwards. Because Big Hill could have very easily fallen on Patterson without putting his full body weight on Patterson. Get his arms out and catch himself as he hits the ground. No harm, no foul. Instead, Big Hill lowers his shoulder and drives it into Patterson as he's on the ground, well after Patterson had already thrown the ball away, well after the clock had hit 0. And this is not the first time Big Hill has done this to a Rough Riders quarterback either. If this was, I wouldn't have an issue with it. But this is at least the second time in 2 seasons he has done this. This is a very controversial hit. Now, I understand both sides of the argument. Now, obviously, like I said, I think it was unnecessary. I think Big Hill should get some form of punishment from the league. But at the same time, Patterson probably should have gotten rid of the ball a little earlier. But regardless, This caused some sparks, including AJ Ouellette immediately running onto the field and getting Big Hill's face before the refs separated them. Corey Mace, the head coach of the Riders, appeared to have some, we'll say some words with head coach Michael O'Shea of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers after the game. They seem to have some words to say, at the very least. I hope that the league looks at this situation and they can at least make a public statement about it. But this video will be going live as the next week in the CFL begins, so I'm not exactly feeling optimistic. As for the Hamilton-Toronto game, I mean, I predicted Toronto would win. It caught me off guard when Hamilton defeated them, but I mean, like, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about with this game. I mean, any team can get a random one-off win against a major rival like Hamilton did here against Toronto. I think the most notable thing is Arbuckle came in when Dukes was having a little bit of a rough game, and now the media seems to be talking about, oh, should Nick Arbuckle start the next game for the Argos? I don't think he should. I think Cameron Dukes is just having the same struggles almost every young quarterback in the CFL has. I don't know why everyone's so concerned about 2 bad games over 3 weeks from Cameron Dukes after he has had a very solid season so far. And then we wrap up week 7 with Calgary defeating BC with a major upset to hand BC their first loss of the season. This is a major win for Calgary, a team looking to prove themselves this season. I saw a lot of good signs from Jake Mail. He looked comfortable in the pocket. He looked like he knew where his receivers would be. He looked like the Jake Mail we have been expecting to see over the last couple seasons. I think it is a very, very good sign for Calgary that Mail is starting to find his groove, and that their defense played solid too. I don't want to say they shut down VA, but they held him in check, kind of. It was a very interesting game, but unfortunately, I don't really know how to talk about this game because it felt like it was less one team outdueling the other and more just teams finding the slightest gap in the other team's game plan and exploiting it very briefly just to have it immediately countered. And it just went back and forth all game, and Calgary just ended up to get the last laugh. And finally, that brings us to week 8 in the CFL and my predictions for the upcoming week. So we open up the week with what should have been a very interesting matchup of Trevor Harris traveling back to Montreal for his first game against the Alouettes since signing in Saskatchewan, and Cody Fajardo once again playing his former team, just for both quarterbacks to be injured. And then, as if that wasn't already frustrating enough, AJ Ouellette is likely going to be out for this game as well. It sounds like Frankie Hickson will be getting the start as of time of recording. But I think, in a weird way, that just makes this matchup even more interesting. Because you've got 2 teams struggling with injuries in prominent positions, and they are going to go to war, and they're 2 of the top teams in the league right now. They are 2 of the last 3 teams in the league with only 1 loss. Something has to give this week, and I think the Rough Riders will steal a very close win in this game. I think just simply because Shea Patterson has had more time with the number 1 offense in Saskatchewan than Caleb Evans has had time with the number 1 offense in Montreal. I feel like that is going to be the difference maker. And I feel like somebody is going to step up for the absence of AJ Ouellette. Ouellette has stepped up to aid Shea Patterson a lot with Harris being out. And I feel like we're going to see that. I don't know if that'll be from someone like Ajo, who's coming off a tremendous game and also will probably be getting more targets because Keon Schaefer-Baker will also likely be out for the Rough Riders this week. Or if that's going to be Ouellette's backup, like Frankie Hickson. I don't know what's going to happen this week. I really don't. But I think whatever it is, I think the Riders are going to manage to steal a win here. And then we move on to Calgary and Ottawa. The battle of the teams in red. Yeah, that sounded cooler in my head. But regardless, I think this could get out of hand. These are two teams very much on an upswing in my opinion. I feel like Calgary is a team that could make some noise down as we get closer to the halfway point of the season and potentially make some noise in the latter half of the season and who knows, maybe even sneak into the playoffs. And I feel like Ottawa, the main reason they're going to get into the playoffs is just simply because Hamilton won't. I feel like Ottawa will make the playoffs, and it's going to be a great opportunity for a very young Red Blacks team to get some very important experience. But I feel like Calgary has the upper hand in this matchup, in this mid-season matchup. I feel like Calgary wins this, minimal issues, though watch for Ottawa to have some moments where you're like, maybe this team has something. And then we move on to the Argonauts and the Bombers. Cameron Duke should play this game. He should play this game. It should not be Nick Arbuckle. It should be Cameron Dukes. Look, Arbuckle has a very fun name to say, as the TSN panel is always more than happy to show us. Arbuckle! But at the end of the day, Dukes has still had a solid season. Yes, he's had 2 rough games over the course of the last 3 weeks, but I don't feel like that's any reason to abandon him yet. He's still the best option this team has right now. As for Winnipeg, I mean, like, I've said it more times than I can count on my podcast. This is an aging Bombers team that has lost at least a half step, maybe more. And I feel like they're just not going to be able to keep up with the Argos this week. And finally, we finish with Edmonton and Hamilton. Oh, this is going to be a very interesting game for all the wrong reasons. In my opinion, these are the 2 weakest teams in the CFL. You have the 1-win Ticats versus the winless Elks. However, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Elks win. I think the Elks beat Hamilton this week. I think players like Bo Levi Mitchell might be a little too amped up after getting their first win of the season last week. And they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is the part where we start the comeback. This is the part where we get going. Just to be run over by the Elks. I feel like this is a good chance for the Elks to show that Chris Jones might have been a big part of the problem, as I believe he was. I also think this week, Trey Ford should start for Edmonton. Now, I'm not saying abandon MBT right now, but I am saying give Ford some playing time. Give him some meaningful playing time in a game too. I feel like this is going to be a very interesting game, and we're going to get to see how these two teams deal with the very interesting point in the season both of them are in. And just before I wrap things up, I want to apologize for missing my episode last week. Last week, I got very busy during the week, and then when I finally had a chance to record my podcast at the end of the week, around the beginning of the weekend, when I finally recorded it and went to start editing it, my footage got corrupted. It's a long story, but let's just say some very colorful words might have come out of my mouth. But I wanted to address that, and now that I have, I feel like it's a good spot to end the episode. So, thank you guys all for watching the episode. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, be sure to follow the 13th Man Podcast Network. I hope you guys have a great day, a great week, a great whatever. Stay safe, stay strong, you got this, and this is Jackie for Prairie Sports Talk, signing off.